I always thought family meant forever, that no matter what mistakes you made, they'd find a way to hold you up, not shove you out. But the night I stood on our cracked front porch, a single suitcase by my side, I learned just how wrong I was. My parents didn't even look me in the eye. They just opened the door, tossed my things out, and slammed it shut like I was some ugly secret they'd been dying to get rid of. I remember staring at that door, half expecting it to swing back open. It never did. I don't know how long I stood there, hugging my jacket tighter against the cold, hoping someone, anyone, would come after me. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out the sounds of the neighborhood. Every window stayed dark. Every light stayed off. I was 17, scared out of my mind, and carrying more than just a duffel bag. I was carrying a life inside me, a life they didn't want, a future they refused to see. I kept telling myself, "You'll figure it out. You have to." The first night alone was the longest night of my life. I crashed at a bus station, curled up on a bench with one hand over my belly like I could shield both of us from the world. Every creak, every shout, every gust of wind felt like it could swallow me whole. I kept thinking about all the things I'd lost in a single night, my home, my safety net, the people I thought would love me no matter what. Turns out, their love had conditions. It always had. In the days that followed, survival became a full-time job. I scraped together coins for dollar burgers, washed up in public restrooms, and kept my head down. Pride didn't feed you, pride didn't keep you warm. I found temp work where I could, cleaning houses, waiting tables, anything that'd pay cash. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for the tiny heartbeat fluttering inside me, the one piece of hope no one could take away. They erased me to protect their pride. I survived to protect my future. Some nights, I'd lie awake wondering how everything had flipped so fast. One minute, I was a girl planning for college, dreaming about traveling, laughing with friends under the stars. The next, I was just another statistic, the girl who ruined her life. That's what my mother had hissed through gritted teeth before she tossed my clothes into a garbage bag. I replayed her words like a broken record, trying to scrape the shame off my skin, but it stuck deeper than I wanted to admit. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Every dollar mattered. Every choice carried weight. I learned to spot danger from a mile away, to say yes sir and thank you ma'am, to keep jobs just a little longer. I figured out which shelters were safer, which streets stayed lit, which diners wouldn't kick you out if you nursed a cup of coffee till sunrise. I stopped expecting kindness. I stopped expecting anything, really, except from myself. If I was gonna make it, it had to be with my own two hands. When my baby finally came into the world, crying and kicking like she already knew how hard life could be, something inside me broke and healed at the same time. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a reason bigger than survival now. I looked at her tiny fingers wrapping around mine, and I promised her, whispered it right there in that fluorescent hospital room, that she'd never feel unwanted a day in her life. I didn't have much to give, but love. I could give her that in overflowing buckets. Leaving that hospital with a newborn and no place to call home should have crushed me. Honestly, part of me thought it might. But there's something about being stripped down to nothing that teaches you just how much you can build from scratch. I bundled her up in secondhand blankets, took a deep breath, and walked straight into the unknown. No family waiting, no arms open, just me, my daughter, and a future we were going to claw our way toward. Because if nobody was going to fight for us, I damn well would. It took me a while to stop hoping they'd call. I'd check my battered old phone, half expecting a message, a voicemail, anything that sounded like, "Come home, Maya." But silence became my new soundtrack. Weeks blurred into months, and reality set in like cement. They weren't coming. They'd made peace with erasing me, like I was a stain they could scrub out of the family photo. It hurt more than I'll ever be able to explain, but it also lit a fire in me I didn't know I had. I started picking up double shifts, saving every crumpled dollar bill I could stuff into a coffee can under my bed. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Dreams? Those were on hold too. My world shrank down to bottles, bills, and bouncing between jobs. But every time I rocked my daughter to sleep, her tiny breath warm against my neck, I knew why it was all worth it. She wasn't just my reason to survive. She was my reason to grow, to prove that love, real love, had nothing to do with shame. There were moments late at night when fear would creep in like a cold draft under the door. What if I wasn't enough? What if the world crushed her the way it tried to crush me? But then morning would come, and I'd see her smile, gummy and perfect, and the fear would shrink just a little. We were building something, even if it didn't look like much from the outside. A tiny rented room, a borrowed crib, a future pieced together one hard-earned day at a time, and every piece was ours. By the time my daughter was old enough to toddle across the cracked linoleum floors, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming stronger, smarter, tougher than the girl they threw away. My family might have slammed the door on me, but they couldn't shut me out of my own life. They couldn't erase the dreams I was still determined to chase. And little by little, the future stopped feeling like an enemy. It started feeling like a second chance, one I was ready to fight for. Time has a funny way of smoothing out the sharp edges. Those first few years were a blur of long shifts, night feedings, scraped knees, and tiny victories. I wasn't some overnight success story. No, it was slow, messy, beautiful work. Every paycheck that covered rent felt like winning the lottery. Every homemade birthday cake, every pair of thrift store sneakers I managed to buy for her growing feet made me feel like I was moving mountains. We didn't have much, but we had enough. We had each other. While I was busy building a life from scratch, I heard whispers about my family now and then. Old neighbors would mention how the cracks started showing not long after I left. My siblings, the ones who'd once stood smugly beside my parents, were now barely speaking to each other. Lawsuits over money, screaming matches at weddings, all those perfect appearances they fought so hard to protect were falling apart like cheap wallpaper. Maybe it should have made me feel vindicated. Mostly, it just made me sad. I didn't waste time wishing them ill. I didn't even waste time wishing they'd change. My hands were too full of real life, homework help, sick days, and learning how to fix a leaky faucet with nothing but YouTube and stubbornness. My daughter grew up bright-eyed and kind-hearted, with a laugh that could fill a room and a resilience that amazed me. Every step she took forward felt like a quiet victory over everything we'd been through. She was proof that our story wasn't tragedy, it was transformation. There were nights, though, when I'd catch myself staring out the window, wondering if they ever thought about me, if they even knew who I'd become. But thinking about it for too long always left a bitter taste in my mouth. So I'd turn off the lights, kiss my daughter goodnight, and remind myself, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their version of love. What I had built, with my own 2 hands and a heart that refused to quit, was more real than anything they could have offered. Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like the girl they abandoned and started feeling like a woman who had survived the fire. I went back to school, online classes at first, fitting lectures and papers between diaper changes and double shifts. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy. But every passing semester built something inside me. Confidence, pride, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to dream again. I wasn't just getting by anymore, I was starting to rise. When I finally earned my degree, it didn't come with a big ceremony or proud family photos, no flowers, no teary speeches. Just me, standing alone in my tiny kitchen, holding the diploma with shaking hands while my daughter cheered and clapped like I just won a gold medal. And honestly, that was enough. More than enough. Because her pride in me felt bigger, purer, than anything I ever could have gotten from the people who turned their backs. In that moment, I wasn't missing anything. I was whole. That little piece of paper opened doors I never thought I'd even be allowed to knock on. I landed a stable job, built a reputation, started saving. Eventually, the idea of starting a business didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. I didn't need anyone to hand me a future. I was busy building my own from the ground up. It wasn't flashy, but it was steady. It was honest, and it was ours. Every decision, every step forward, was a silent rebellion against the fate they thought they sentenced me to. Sometimes people ask me if I ever thought about going back, trying to mend fences. The truth is, I did. I thought about it a lot, especially on lonely holidays when the world felt like it belonged to everyone but me. But forgiveness isn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about refusing to let that hurt shape who you become. I didn't need to return to the people who threw me away. I needed to become someone who didn't need them anymore. And little by little, I did. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, stitched together with late-night laughter, scraped-together pizza nights, and 1,000 tiny victories no one else ever saw. My daughter grew up knowing the value of $1 and the weight of kindness. She didn't have grandparents spoiling her or cousins crowding around the Thanksgiving table, but she had something better. A home built on honesty, not appearances. We carved out a family from the bare wood of survival and made it something beautiful. Meanwhile, the stories about my old family kept trickling in. Bankruptcies, divorces, scandals they couldn't keep hidden anymore. The perfect picture they fought so hard to paint was cracked beyond repair. A few times I caught myself wondering if they ever regretted it, tossing me aside to protect a reputation that collapsed anyway. But then I'd shake it off. Their regret, if it existed, wasn't my responsibility to carry. I had my own life to protect now, my own future to water and grow. There were still hard days, of course, times when fear crept back in, whispering doubts about whether I was enough, whether I was doing right by the little girl who depended on me. But then she'd grab my hand in the grocery store, flash me that gap-toothed grin, and all the noise in my head would quiet. We weren't surviving anymore. We were living, maybe a little messily, maybe a little stubbornly, but living just the same. And that was something no one could take from us. Looking back, I realize resilience isn't built in the easy seasons. It's forged in the dark, when no one's clapping for you, when it's just you and the stubborn belief that things can get better. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant outgrowing the ones who couldn't love me properly, and choosing every single day to keep walking forward anyway. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. An instinct told me to let it ring. But something, maybe stubborn curiosity, maybe a part of me that still hadn't fully healed, made me pick up. The voice on the other end was tight, formal, like someone reading a script they didn't want to say. My mother was sick, they said, really sick, and no one else could take care of her. My siblings, the ones who once stood so proudly against me, were too busy to step in. I hung up without promising anything. For days the call haunted me. I kept replaying it in my head while folding laundry, making dinner, sitting in traffic. Part of me wanted to slam the door the way they once had, to shrug and say, "Not my problem." But the truth is, compassion has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. Not for them, not for what they did, but because I wasn't the same broken girl they threw out. I was a woman now, one who knew the difference between boundaries and bitterness. The day I finally drove back to the house, it didn't feel like a homecoming. It felt like walking into a memory I'd long outgrown. The place looked smaller, sadder. The paint peeled from the shutters. The garden was a mess of weeds and broken pots. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of dust and old regrets. And there she was, my mother, frail, gray, a ghost of the woman who once screamed at me to get out. She looked up at me with tired eyes that barely recognized the person standing in the doorway. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't crumble. I just stepped forward, set my bag down, and said the only thing that mattered now: I'm here to help. Not because she deserved it, not because I owed her anything, but because sometimes showing up isn't about them. It's about proving to yourself that you are more than the pain they caused. And as I unpacked the medications, checked the hospital forms, and made a list of appointments, I realized something. Maybe coming back wasn't the weakness I once feared. Maybe it was strength. The first few days were harder than I expected. She barely spoke. When she did, it was in clipped, brittle sentences, like even kindness had become foreign to her. I kept things practical, setting up pill organizers, arranging doctor's visits, scrubbing bathrooms that hadn't seen bleach in years. It was easier to focus on the tasks than on the hollow silence between us. Some wounds ran so deep they didn't bleed anymore. They just ached in ways you couldn't name out loud. Every now and then, in a flicker of lucidity, she'd look at me with something almost like recognition. I'd catch her staring while I cooked or filled out forms, her brow furrowed like she was trying to place a face she should have known by heart. But the words never came. No apologies, no explanations. Just long stretches of quiet, broken only by the hum of the old ceiling fan and the creak of worn floorboards. If she felt shame, she wore it like an invisible shroud, heavy but unspoken. Meanwhile, the siblings who once paraded around in matching family portraits were nowhere to be found. Their excuses rolled in like clockwork. Business trips, sick kids, urgent meetings. I'd forward updates about Mom's condition, list out her needs, ask for help. And in return, radio silence or carefully worded apologies that meant nothing. The ones they called the good children were too busy preserving their own perfect little lives to show up for the woman they once fought so hard to impress. Part of me wanted to feel angry, to boil over, to throw their hypocrisy back in their faces. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of chasing things that were never going to be mine. So I kept my head down and did what needed to be done. For her, for me, for the girl I used to be. The one who deserved to be treated better than she ever was. Because even if they'd forgotten how to love properly, I hadn't. And sometimes the greatest strength is refusing to mirror the cruelty you were handed. Taking care of her wasn't glamorous. It was hard, gritty work. Late nights juggling medications, emergency room visits, endless paperwork. Sometimes she'd cry out in her sleep, mumbling names, reliving some memory I wasn't part of. Other nights she'd simply lie there, small and silent, trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her. I wondered if regret kept her awake too, gnawing at the edges the way it used to gnaw at me. Maybe some ghosts are louder when the world gets quiet. I didn't do it for recognition. There were no thank yous, no sudden declarations of love. I wasn't expecting them. I wasn't that naive anymore. What kept me there was something stronger than anger or pride. It was the decision to be better. To not let their mistakes define who I became. If they taught me anything, it was that cruelty is easy. Compassion, real, painful, humbling compassion, that's the hard thing. And standing there, feeding her soup she could barely swallow, I chose the hard thing. The house itself felt like a living memory, pressing against my skin with every creaking stair and faded photograph. Everywhere I turned, it whispered pieces of a past that could have broken me. But it didn't. Every scrubbed floor, every washed sheet, every carefully measured dose was a quiet rebellion against what they had believed about me. They saw me as a failure, a mistake. They couldn't see the woman standing in front of them now, stronger, scarred, but deeply, fiercely whole. I didn't know how long this would last. Days, weeks, maybe months. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't doing it for them, or even for her. I was doing it for me. For the girl they abandoned. For the woman who refused to be erased. And somewhere, deep in the spaces between resentment and forgiveness, I started to understand that sometimes healing doesn't look like a grand moment. Sometimes it looks like showing up, day after day, even when no one notices you're there. The days blurred together, but slowly, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No tearful speeches, no big revelations. Just small moments, a squeeze of my hand when I tucked her in, a whispered thank you when she thought I wasn't listening. Sometimes she'd look at me with tears in her eyes, and I knew she was seeing it clearly now. The life she threw away, the daughter she turned her back on, was the only one still standing beside her. The irony hung heavy in the air between us. There were times she tried to say more, her voice cracking under the weight of old pride and newer shame. She'd start to apologize, fumbling with words that felt too late and too small. I'd listen, but I didn't rush in to comfort her. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't the broken girl desperate for her approval anymore either. Some bridges don't need burning. They crumble all on their own. I could offer forgiveness without pretending I'd forgotten everything that came before. While I managed her care, I also started managing other things. The bank accounts, the medical bills, the crumbling estate paperwork that no one else bothered to touch. It wasn't hard to slip into the role. After all, I'd spent years handling harder things with less support. I kept records meticulously, saved receipts, filed legal forms. Every signature, every notarized letter was another quiet brick in the foundation I was building. Not for revenge exactly, but for something closer to justice. Meanwhile, the siblings who once played favorites and pointed fingers stayed away. Their names popped up only when money was involved. Questions about the house, about the will, about what would be fair. Funny how fairness only seemed urgent when there was something to lose. I didn't answer their calls right away. I didn't have to. For once, the power wasn't in their hands anymore. It was in mine. And I wasn't about to let it slip away easily. Every visit to the lawyer's office felt like reclaiming a little piece of myself. I wasn't signing papers out of spite. I was protecting what my mother could no longer guard, and what my siblings didn't deserve to inherit blindly. Every document I filed was a reminder. I wasn't the lost teenager they discarded. I was a woman who knew how to survive, how to fight smart, and how to make sure the future we were building wouldn't be rewritten by people who abandoned it first. There was a strange satisfaction in watching it all unfold so quietly. No grand confrontations, no shouting matches or slamming doors, just a steady, unshakable presence, mine, where they had left a void. While they whispered among themselves about who would get what, I sat with the lawyers, with the doctors, with the accountants, ensuring every choice honored reality, not fantasy. They thought they could parachute back in when it was convenient. They never realized that door had long since closed. Sometimes I'd get texts from my siblings, the tone dripping with fake concern. Hope Mom's doing okay. Let us know if you need anything. It would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. I didn't even bother responding most of the time. They weren't checking in out of love. They were sniffing around for opportunity, for a slice of something they hadn't earned, hadn't fought for, hadn't even bothered to show up for. But I knew the truth, and deep down, so did they. And my mother. She knew it too. In her clearer moments, she'd reach for my hand with a desperation that said more than words ever could. I never pulled away, but I didn't lean in either. I gave her what she needed to find peace, not what she needed to feel absolved. There's a difference. And even though the girl inside me still carried the scars, the woman standing by that bedside knew exactly what strength looked like. And it didn't look like vengeance shouted from rooftops. It looked like dignity whispered in locked rooms. In those final weeks, the house felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. My mother grew quieter, her body shrinking into the bed like a shadow of the woman who once ruled this place with an iron will. Some days, she barely opened her eyes. Other days, she'd whisper memories, fragmented and aching, pieces of a past she couldn't piece back together. I listened, not because I needed to hear them, but because maybe, just maybe, she needed someone to carry the truth with her to the end. When the time came to update her will, she didn't hesitate. She scribbled my name with a shaking hand, nodding when the lawyer asked if this was her wish. I didn't push her. I didn't beg for it. It was her choice, made freely, with the clarity that sometimes only comes when everything else falls away. Watching her sign those papers felt surreal. Not triumphant, not bitter, just full circle. Like the final stitch in a wound that would always leave a scar, but no longer bled. I kept taking care of things the way I always had, quietly, thoroughly, without needing applause. Bills got paid, medications got refilled, the house stayed running, even as she slipped further away each day. And while my siblings bickered behind closed doors, weaving stories and plotting strategies, I stayed steady. I didn't need to fight them. They were losing all on their own, one selfish decision at a time. And I was too busy tending to what actually mattered to waste energy on bitterness. When I tucked her in at night, smoothing the thin blanket over her frail frame, I'd sometimes wonder if she realized the depth of what was happening. That the daughter she threw away was the only one left carrying the weight of this broken family. And maybe that was the quietest revenge of all. Not shouting it in her face, not throwing it back like a weapon, but living it every day in the silence. Because real power doesn't come from being the loudest voice in the room. It comes from being the last one standing when the noise fades away. When she passed, it was quiet. No grand speeches, no last-minute confessions. Just a soft breath that never came back, a final stillness that settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I sat there for a long time after the nurses called it. Not crying, not raging, just sitting, feeling the weight of an ending that wasn't clean or easy or fair, but was finally unmistakably here. She was gone. And somehow, against every odd they stacked against me, I was still standing. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and funeral arrangements, things my siblings wanted no part of but still somehow managed to have opinions about. Suddenly, they had time to show up. Suddenly, they cared about appearances again. I could see it in the way they circled, sniffing around like vultures, trying to gauge what was left behind. They hadn't been there when she needed a glass of water or a hand to hold, but now they wanted a piece of the legacy they ignored until it was convenient. When the lawyer read the will, the room went dead silent. I didn't even look at them. I kept my eyes on my folded hands, steady as stone, while he explained that everything, the house, the savings, the little bit that was left, was going to me and my daughter. No loopholes, no hidden clauses, just a clear, final choice. For once, there was no debate, no shouting, just the stunned, brittle silence of people realizing too late that the game they thought they were playing had been lost long ago. They didn't take it well. Accusations flew. Ugly words were tossed around like grenades. How could I? How dare I? Didn't I feel guilty? And for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I looked each of them in the eye and said what needed to be said, not with anger, not with spite, but with a calmness that came from finally knowing my own worth. You were too busy to care for her when she was alive. Don't pretend she mattered now that she's gone. Their faces twisted into a mess of rage and shame, but I didn't budge. I'd spent too many years carrying the weight of their choices. I wasn't about to start carrying their guilt too. It wasn't my fault they chose absence. It wasn't my fault they abandoned her when it was easier than staying. And it damn sure wasn't my fault that she, in the end, gave everything to the one person who showed up when it mattered most. Actions had consequences. They just never expected the bill to come due. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub salt in old wounds. That would have made me just like them, and I was done living in their shadow. Instead, I thanked the lawyer, gathered the papers, and walked out with my daughter's hand wrapped tightly in mine. We didn't look back. We didn't have to. The past was crumbling behind us, piece by piece, while our future waited, bright, sturdy, and finally ours. They could fight among themselves over the wreckage. I had better places to be. Driving away from that house, the one that once felt like the center of my whole world, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not the kind that comes from pretending things didn't hurt, but the kind that grows from surviving them. The house shrank in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely, swallowed by trees and distance. And with it, I let go of the last bits of longing I didn't even know I was still carrying. They had thrown me away like a burden. I had risen like a legacy they couldn't inherit. When we got home, I opened the front door and breathed in the smell of our life, coffee and books, and faint traces of lavender from the cheap candles we both loved. My daughter dropped her backpack by the couch and flashed me a smile that could have lit up a whole city. And standing there, in the middle of our messy, beautiful, ordinary home, I realized something. The best revenge was never about taking something from them. It was about giving myself everything they said I'd never have. That night, after my daughter went to bed, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights blink and hum like a heartbeat. I thought about everything we had weathered, the nights in bus stations, the days of working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, the birthdays we celebrated with homemade cakes and laughter no one else ever heard. All of it had built this life, brick by brick, not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but out of something much stronger. Hope. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about setting them free. It was about setting myself free. Free from the need for their approval, free from the ache of wishing they'd been different, free to live without dragging their mistakes behind me like a broken chain. They didn't get to define me anymore. They didn't even get to be part of the story I was still writing, the one filled with love and mistakes and learning and second chances I gave myself without asking permission. The inheritance, the house, the paperwork, those were just symbols. What mattered was the life I had already built long before a single dollar changed hands. A life full of tiny, stubborn joys they could never understand because they never fought for them. I wasn't just the daughter they threw away. I was the woman who had learned how to heal without their permission, how to thrive without their applause, how to love without their lessons. And that was everything. As I turned off the lights and headed toward bed, I whispered a promise to the night, to the girl I used to be, to the future still unfolding ahead of us. We are not what they left behind. We are what we chose to become. And in that quiet moment, I knew, whatever storms still waited down the road, whatever shadows tried to reach for us, we were ready. Because we weren't broken. We were unbreakable.